So my name is John Barrass and I'm Deputy Chief Executive of the Wealth Management Association. PRIPS stands for Packaged Retail Investment Products. The issue about PRIPS is how they should be sold to private consumers. There's a view in Europe that they should be accompanied by a key information document because the consumer doesn't know enough about them. This key information document should contain information about what a PRIP actually is and what the consumer is buying, and information about the costs that the consumer has to pay to get hold of the thing in the first place. Our view is that this is a good idea and that we should go ahead with it, and it would help because in the market you have a specific product to do with unit trusts called UCITS, and that already has a key information document attached to it. So this initiative would bring other products which are not UCITS into line with what you do for UCITS, and that would then bring comparability for the investor. He'd be able to look at UCITS and non-UCITS type products and decide what he wanted, because the kids in each case would tell him some information on which to make a decision. Well, the PRIPS legislation as it stands, there are three versions of this, one from the European Parliament, one from the European Council, and one from the European Commission. They've yet to work out how to amalgamate these into one. Now, of these three versions, we prefer the Council version, that is the one to do with member governments, because it seems to us to address the problems most accurately. It deploys the idea of comparability, it makes the KID roughly similar to the one you already use for the UCITS side. It doesn't have too much extraneous information in, it won't confuse the consumer, and it has in it a particular thing that we value, which is what we call the derogation. That is where you're able to send the KID out after you've done a deal on market for the consumer, and that allows the consumer to buy products which are quoted on exchanges and priced in real time, not priced at the end and the beginning of a day. This is all very useful for the consumer because it brings them access and information and opens the market up to them in a way we think is right. The issue for us is that the parliamentary version of the European parliamentary version of this document isn't quite the same, and it has a lot of difficulties and problems in it which arise from obstructing, if you like, the ability of the consumer to do on-market dealing. I mean, one of the problems that we had was that while the Council and Commission had kept the PRIPS proposals to packaged products only, the Parliament extended the idea, that is the idea of sending out a key information document ahead of buying these products, to include non-packaged proposals such as equities and also corporate bonds. And while in the negotiations so far the Parliament has backed away from keeping equities in the scope, corporate bonds are still there. And generally speaking, the requirement is that a fund that is quoted on an exchange should be treated as a fund, not as an equity, even though what you're doing is buying a share in the product. So you have some problems with the secondary trading of these funds on market if the KID has to go out each time before you can buy. We are lobbying very strongly that corporate bonds should be left out of the scope, so that we should return the scope to the packaged product area only. We are arguing that the secondary trading issue should be dealt with, that the derogation, in other words, that allows you to secondary trade without having to have a KID sent out before you can do the deal, should be implemented right across the board for all secondary trading in products which can be defined as KIDs but are quoted on exchange. And we are arguing that there should be no requirement for consumers to sign off the KID and send it back before a deal can be done. And we are arguing that in the liability case you should have entirely separate documentation for the intermediary on the one hand, who is going to distribute the KID and who has to provide his costs, and by the product manufacturer on the other, who will make the KID and be the investing company that actually invests the fund and so on, which the KID is, but who probably doesn't distribute it. As long as those two are separate, then you won't get liability problems. I think that the chances are that the corporate bonds will actually be got out from there. I think that we might get the derogation in, which would help with the secondary trading. I think the liability issue is going to remain a kind of a problem, and I think there may well be some difficulties about circumstances in which the investor is still required to sign off the document and send it back, which could hold things up. So it's hard to know, but these are some examples of where you might get outcomes. In terms of process, you now have three pieces of legislation. As I said earlier, the Parliament, the Council and the Commission each have their text on the table. In Europe, when that happens, you have a system called the trilogues. The trilogues are when each of the three parties puts a team for negotiation together with the others, and they basically hammer out a single text from the three. It's an amalgamation process. There's a bit of horse trading, a bit of redrafting, and so on, but you come out with a third or sorry, fourth version of the text, which is the combined version, which is the one that will eventually go to the European Parliament for vote in plenary, which will endorse it then as a piece of European law. The timeline is quite short for what happens now. You're at the end of January, February, March, got 2 months probably, and then a very quick process to get the final document before plenary for the vote. If that happens, then this Parliament would have signed off the law, which can then be published in the European Journal and go to the poll, and dissolve and go to the polls with that job done. If that doesn't happen, frankly, you're going to have a leftover piece of legislation for the next Parliament, and we don't know what will happen then. You then have implementation where the first thing to do, you've got to publish it in the European Journal. That will then set out the time frame, but in all honesty, I would think it's between 1.5 and 2 years from the time that actually happens.